I live in a rental house just outside Portland, Maine, and there's something that happened last winter that I can't stop thinking about. It was mid-January, that stretch of the year when the sun sets before you even finish your workday, and everything outside turns into this flat, colorless gray. The kind of cold that seeps through the walls no matter how high you crank the heat. I had moved there about 3 months earlier for a job transfer and didn't know many people yet. The house was one of those old New England colonials, probably built in the 60s, with creaky floors and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. Most nights I'd get home from work, make dinner, and spend the evening reading or watching something on my laptop. It was a quiet life, maybe too quiet, but I told myself I needed the reset after everything that happened in Boston. That particular evening, I remember the temperature had dropped to around 15 degrees. There was no snow on the ground yet, just this hard, frozen earth and bare trees that looked skeletal against the dull sky. I'd gotten home around 6:30, changed into sweatpants and a hoodie, and was heating up leftover soup on the stove. The house felt especially empty that night, the kind of emptiness that makes every small sound seem louder than it should be. The neighborhood was mostly families and retirees, the kind of place where people kept to themselves but would wave if you passed them getting the mail. I'd only spoken to maybe 2 neighbors since moving in, both just brief exchanges about trash pickup schedules and whether the water pressure was always that bad. The house directly across the street had been empty since November, a for sale sign tilting in the frozen front yard. To my left was an elderly couple I'd never actually met, and to my right was a single guy around my age who worked nights and slept during the day. We'd crossed paths exactly once. What I'm trying to say is that it wasn't the kind of neighborhood where people just dropped by. No door-to-door salespeople, no religious groups, no one collecting for charities.
In the 3 months I'd been there, my doorbell had rung exactly twice, once for a misdelivered package and once when the landlord came by to fix the furnace. So when I heard the knock that night, slow and deliberate, 3 evenly spaced raps on the front door, my first thought was that something must be wrong. Maybe a neighbor needed help, or there was an emergency I hadn't heard about. I turned off the stove and walked through the living room to the front door. The porch light was on, casting this yellowish glow through the frosted glass panel on the upper half of the door. I could see 2 silhouettes standing there, both of them perfectly still, not shifting their weight, not talking to each other, just waiting. There was something immediately off about how motionless they were. When people wait at a door in the cold, they usually move around a little, stamp their feet, hunch their shoulders against the wind. These 2 looked like statues. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, and the cold air hit me like a wall. Standing on my porch were 2 women, both probably in their early 50s, though their faces had this timeless quality that made it hard to pin down. They were dressed almost identically in long wool coats that looked like they belonged to another era, dark navy blue, with wide collars and covered buttons. The coats hung on them in a way that seemed too big, like they'd been borrowed from someone else, or bought decades ago when they were a different size. Under the coats they wore plain white blouses buttoned all the way to the throat, and dark skirts that reached past their knees. Everything about their clothing looked faded and strangely formal. The woman standing slightly in front was taller, maybe 5'8", with dark brown hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. Her skin was pale, not just winter pale, but the kind of pallor that made me think she hadn't seen sunlight in months. But what really stopped me were her eyes.
They were dark brown, almost black, and when she looked at me, I had this immediate gut-level response that something was fundamentally wrong. Her eyes didn't reflect the porch light the way I should. They looked flat, like painted circles on a mannequin's face. There was no depth to them, no life, no emotion, just this empty stare that went straight through me. The second woman was shorter, stockier, with gray blonde hair also pulled back, but falling in thin wisps around her face. She held a small leather book in both hands, pressed against her chest like a shield. I couldn't see what it was at first, maybe a prayer book or a journal, but she gripped it with white knuckles. Her face was rounder than the first woman's, with deep lines around her mouth, and she didn't make eye contact with me at all. Instead, she stared at the door frame just past my shoulder, her mouth slightly open, breathing slowly through her teeth. The taller woman spoke first, and her voice was wrong in a way I'm still struggling to articulate. It was monotone but not robotic, slow but not drugged, and pitched just slightly lower than what seemed natural. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask if I had a moment or apologize for the late hour. She just started talking, launching into this stream of words about grace and salvation and the cleansing power of acceptance. But it wasn't like any religious speech I'd ever heard. There was no passion in it, no attempt at persuasion, no inflection that suggested she cared whether I was listening or not. And she didn't stop. She didn't pause for breath, didn't leave space for me to respond, didn't check my expression to see if her words were landing. It was like listening to someone recite something they'd memorized phonetically in a language they didn't understand. The words were English, and they were technically arranged into sentences, but the meaning seemed to slide off them. I tried to focus on what she was saying, tried to find a natural break where I could politely decline and close the door, but the harder I concentrated, the more the words seemed to blur together into this droning hum.
I don't know how long I stood there listening to her. It could have been 30 seconds or 3 minutes. Time started feeling strange, elastic, like it was stretching and compressing without following any normal rhythm. I became hyper-aware of physical details, the way her lips barely moved when she spoke, the fact that I couldn't see her breath in the freezing air, even though mine was coming out in visible puffs, the way the porch light seemed to dim slightly, though that might have been my imagination. The shorter woman still hadn't moved, still clutching that leather book, still staring past me with her mouth hanging slightly open. And those eyes, the taller woman's eyes never blinked. I watched for it, specifically looked for that automatic reflex, and it never came. She just held that flat, empty stare locked on my face, while words poured out of her in that awful monotone. My body started reacting before my conscious mind caught up. My heart rate picked up. My hands felt cold and numb. There was this crawling sensation up the back of my neck, every nerve screaming that I was in danger, that I needed to get away from these women immediately. But I couldn't move. I couldn't make my arm reach for the door, couldn't make my mouth form words to interrupt her, couldn't make my legs take a step backward. It was like being trapped inside my own body, fully conscious, but completely disconnected from my ability to control my muscles. I could feel everything, the cold air on my face, the hard floor under my feet, the way my heart was hammering against my ribs. But when I tried to move, tried to do anything to end this encounter, nothing happened. My limbs felt heavy and distant, like they belonged to someone else. I've had dreams like this, nightmares where you try to run and your legs won't work, where you try to scream and no sound comes out. But this was real. I was awake, standing in my own doorway, and I couldn't make myself close the door on these women. The taller woman kept talking, something about harvest and judgment, and the fateful being gathered.
Her voice never changed pitch, never sped up or slowed down, just maintained that same mechanical rhythm. I started noticing other details that made no sense. The way the shadows fell on her face was wrong, like the light was coming from a direction that didn't match where my porch light actually was. The way her coat didn't move, even when a gust of wind rattled the windows. The way time seemed to have stopped completely outside this moment, like the rest of the world had been paused, and there was only this doorway, these women, this awful voice that wouldn't stop. The shorter woman suddenly looked directly at me, and it was somehow worse than the tall one's stare. Her eyes were a watery gray-blue, and they were filled with something I can only describe as hunger. Not sexual, not violent, but a desperate, consuming need that made my stomach twist. She still didn't speak, didn't change her expression, but her grip on the leather book tightened, and I heard the binding creak. Up close, I could see that the book's cover was unmarked, no title or decoration, just old, cracked leather the color of dried blood. She tilted her head very slowly to the left, the movement wrong and angular like a bird or an insect, and her breathing changed. It became deeper, more deliberate, like she was drawing in my scent. The taller woman never acknowledged her companion's movement, just kept speaking in that horrible monotone. I realized with mounting horror that I couldn't remember my own name. The thought should have been there, automatic and immediate, but when I reached for it, there was just blankness. I couldn't remember where I was before this moment, couldn't remember driving home from work, heating up the soup, walking to the door. It was like everything before these women arrived had been erased, and I'd existed forever in this frozen instant. My vision started narrowing, darkening at the edges like I was about to pass out. But I didn't lose consciousness. I remained perfectly aware, trapped in this shrinking tunnel of perception with these two women at the center.
The tall woman's mouth was still moving, words still coming out, but I couldn't hear them anymore over the rushing sound in my ears. Everything felt muffled and distant, except for the cold and the weight of their attention on me. That was the worst part. The sense that they were studying me, measuring me for something, conducting some kind of test or evaluation that I didn't understand. The shorter woman began moving her lips, mouthing words I couldn't hear, her eyes never leaving my face. Her expression still hadn't changed, but tears started running down her cheeks, slow and steady, catching the porch light. She didn't blink them away, didn't wipe them, just let them run down her face and drip off her chin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam the door and run to the back of the house and lock myself in a room and call someone, anyone. But I couldn't do any of those things. I could only stand there, paralyzed, while something deeply wrong played out on my doorstep. Then the tall woman said my name. I hadn't told her my name. She shouldn't have known my name. But she said it, clear and distinct in that flat monotone, and hearing it in her voice felt like a violation. It broke something in me, some final barrier between pure panic and animal survival instinct. I felt my right hand twitch, then my shoulder, then suddenly I could move again. The world rushed back in, sound and color, and the sharp bite of January cold. My heart was racing so hard I thought I might vomit. The tall woman stopped talking mid-sentence, her mouth closing with an audible click of teeth. For one long moment, we all stood there in complete silence. The women stared at me with those awful, empty eyes, and I stared back, my hand finally rising to grip the edge of the door. The shorter woman's tears had stopped, but her face was still wet, shining in the yellow light. Neither of them moved to leave. Neither of them spoke. They just waited, like they were expecting me to do something or say something that would give them permission to continue.
Every instinct I had was screaming at me to close the door, but some other part of my brain, the part that had been socialized to be polite and accommodating, kept me frozen for just a second too long. The taller woman smiled. It wasn't a human smile. Her lips pulled back from her teeth in a way that showed too many teeth, that stretched her mouth too wide, that didn't involve any other part of her face. Her eyes stayed flat and dead. She said, "Thank you for your time," in that same monotone, and then both women turned in perfect unison, moving with synchronized precision, and walked down my porch steps. I watched them move down the walkway toward the street, their movements stiff and mechanical, their coats hanging motionless despite the wind. They reached the sidewalk and turned left, walking side by side, and within seconds they were swallowed by the darkness beyond the reach of my porch light. I slammed the door so hard the frame rattled. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the deadbolt. I stumbled backward into the living room and sank onto the couch, my legs giving out. I couldn't catch my breath. My chest felt tight and my vision was swimming. I sat there for what must have been 10 minutes, just trying to remember how to breathe normally, trying to convince myself that what had just happened was real. My mouth tasted like metal. My hands were ice cold. I could still see those eyes, flat and empty and wrong, burned into my vision like an afterimage. Eventually, I got up and checked every lock in the house, front door, back door, all the windows, even the basement door that stuck and barely closed properly. I pulled the curtains shut on every window facing the street. I turned on every light in the house, upstairs and down, until the whole place was blazing. Only then did I feel like I could think straight. I went to the front window and carefully pulled the curtain back just enough to look out at the street. There was no one there. No women in dark coats walking in either direction, no cars parked where they shouldn't be.
Just the empty street, the frozen yards, the tilted for sale sign across the way swaying slightly in the wind. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the doorbell camera app. I'd installed a Ring doorbell the week after I moved in, mostly because the landlord had mentioned there had been some package thefts in the area. I navigated to the timeline and found the recording from about 15 minutes earlier. I tapped play, my hands still shaking. The video showed me walking to the door and opening it. It showed me standing in the doorway, facing outward, my body language tense and uncomfortable. But the porch was empty. There was no one there. The camera had captured me having a 10-minute conversation with absolutely nothing. I watched the video 3 times, my skin crawling worse with each viewing. You could see me standing there, my mouth occasionally moving like I was trying to speak, my posture rigid.
You could see the exact moment when I seemed to break out of whatever had held me, my hand suddenly moving to the door. But there were no women. The porch was empty the entire time. I was about to watch it a fourth time when my phone rang, and I nearly threw it across the room. It was my neighbor from the right, the guy who worked nights. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. His voice was shaky. "Hey, I don't know if you're okay, but I just got home and I wanted to check. I saw you through my window about 20 minutes ago. You were standing at your open door in the freezing cold, and there were these two women on your porch. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but something felt really wrong about the whole thing. I almost came over, but then they left and you closed the door. Are you all right?" I couldn't speak for a moment. He'd seen them. They were real. I wasn't losing my mind. But if they were real, why didn't the camera pick them up? He asked again if I was okay, and I managed to say yes, that I was fine, thank you for checking. We hung up, and I sat there staring at my phone, trying to make sense of any of it. Over the next few days, I tried to find answers.
I asked other neighbors if they'd seen anyone matching that description in the area. No one had. I posted in the neighborhood Facebook group asking if anyone else had gotten weird visitors lately. A few people replied about the usual door-to-door solar panel sales and Jehovah's Witnesses, but nothing like what I described. I even called the police non-emergency line, though I wasn't sure what I was reporting. The officer who took my information was polite, but clearly thought I was wasting his time. He said he'd make a note of it, but unless the women came back or did something threatening, there wasn't much they could do. I pulled the footage from my neighbor's security camera, the one that faced the street. He sent it to me the day after I asked. His camera had a different angle than mine, showing the side view of my porch. You could see shapes on the porch, dark blurs where the women should have been, but they were indistinct and flickering, like bad reception on an old TV. They appeared and disappeared in the frame, never fully solid, never fully visible. My neighbor said his camera had never malfunctioned like that before or since. I saved the footage to 3 different hard drives and a cloud account. I needed proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing, even if that proof was just distorted shadows. It's been over a year now, and I still think about it constantly. I never saw those women again. I moved out of that house 4 months after the incident, as soon as my lease was up. I couldn't stay there. Every evening when the sun set and the shadows got long, I'd find myself watching the door, waiting for that knock to come again. I couldn't sleep in the house with the lights off. I'd lie awake listening for footsteps on the porch, for that flat, monotone voice starting up again outside my window. I'm back in Boston now, in an apartment building with a doorman and security cameras that work properly. But sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I see those flat, empty eyes staring through me. I remember how it felt to be trapped in my own body, unable to move, unable to look away. I remember the shorter woman's hungry stare and the tears running down her face. Most of all, I remember that smile, too wide, too many teeth, pulling at skin that shouldn't have stretched that way. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to come up with logical explanations. Carbon monoxide poisoning, a dissociative episode, shared hallucination. But my neighbor saw them too, and his camera captured something, even if it was just corrected footage. I don't know what those women were or what they wanted from me. I don't know why they came to my door that night or why they left when they did. I don't know if they're still out there somewhere, knocking on other doors in other towns during other dark winter evenings. All I know is that whenever someone knocks unexpectedly now, I look through the peephole first, and I don't open the door after dark. Not for anyone.